Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Clarity Sessions with Gentle Inspirer. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, you might wonder what Gentle Inspirer is, and I'm just going to give you the simple and short explanation. It simply means, what is Gentle Inspirer? Gentle Inspirer is a voice of clarity in the world of confusion. And what is the clarity session for? In very simple terms, the clarity session is designed to help you see better, make better decisions, and to move with purpose. And that's essentially what we are here to do in this community. We believe that people are born for a reason, there's a purpose behind your life. And what precedes that is clarity. What precedes the pursuit of purpose is clarity. So, clarity precedes movement. And so we're going to be having a series of clarity sessions on an ongoing basis in this community. And it will be pertaining to matters of life, matters of leadership, matters of relationships and enterprise, especially for those who are building as well. And so today's clarity session is sort of an introductory clarity session, but this is not the very first clarity session I'm doing. But under the Gentleman Inspirer brand, this is the very first, and this is a welcome conversation to the clarity session. And I decided I was going to have a conversation about finding what holds you back, essentially because it is a prequel to other conversations that we're going to be having. And the reason is because in my little journey, my little experience coaching people, mentoring people, one of the things that I've found is that there are certain insidious, sinister, almost unseen things, factors that hold people back from becoming the best version of themselves. And those are the things that I hope to uncover in this conversation. I initially wanted to have this conversation I wanted to talk about the frameworks for clarity. For example, if you were stuck in a particular situation, how do I find what is making me stuck, and then how do I move on from there? But I had that conversation in my mind severally from when I planned this session till even like few hours before now. I've been having that conversation, wanting to figure out what's the best way to approach this conversation. I wanted to talk about the clarity frameworks, how you can essentially, in whatever situation, find out what is holding you back and then how to move on from there. I said, okay, no, I'm going to talk about the things that hold you back, maybe highlight the limiting beliefs and things like that that hold you back. It was going to be a good conversation, but I wasn't yet satisfied with that because I felt that there was a conversation that we needed to have before getting into these other conversations. And I think I settled that contest in my mind, and that will be the direction of this conversation today. We are still talking about finding what holds you back, but we're going to approach it from a different direction. And before I talk about that direction, let me set it like this. Every experience that we have in life happens within a particular context. And what I mean in this particular situation is that every experience we have as human beings happens in our soul. Now, there may be certain other factors that are in the external environment, for example, that become limitations or stumbling blocks or obstacles in the external environment. But essentially, majority of what holds us back is within our soul. And that is why today I'm going to focus the conversation on talking about the soul. Why am I talking about the soul? Because as we get into this conversation and we begin to understand the nature of the soul and how the soul behaves in relation to other people and to life, we'll begin to understand where we have the limitations that we have. And hopefully that will open your eyes to see clearly and be able to also diagnose your own situation, so that whatever situation you find yourself, you'll be able to ask the right questions and you would have the clarity to move from where you are to become unstuck essentially. And so we're going to be talking about the soul. I'm not going to be doing a technical conversation. I wanted to talk about the origin of the soul and then talk about the properties of the soul and how the soul behaves, how to transform the soul, and how words affect the soul. I was going to do that proper conversation in this clarity session, but I realized that it was going to be too much to handle in one session. So I decided that I'm going to divide it into maybe 3 or 4 sessions. So today's session, we're going to be talking about the properties of the soul, the behavior of the soul, and if we have time, we'll talk a little bit about how to transform the soul. So that's how we're going to take this conversation. And in the next session, we're going to take the conversation further. I wanted this conversation to be live. That means I wanted to be able to take questions from the chat. But because we didn't meet up with the YouTube streaming criteria yet, so this is a pre-recorded conversation, but we're going to premiere it, right? And I'm also going to be watching as well. So what I'm going to do is I'll be in the comment section, and if you have any questions as we go into this conversation, please drop it in the comment box. I'm going to collate all those questions, and then I'm going to do a question and answer session and then upload it tomorrow. And when the restriction for the live streaming is lifted, then we can have those live conversations on YouTube, and I'll also maybe we'll also have some of those conversations on Instagram, and we'll also have follow-up conversations in our WhatsApp community, and we'll take it from there. I have a passion for helping people uncover things that hold them back, those complex matters. I find joy in decoupling them and helping people find clarity from there. So we're going to be talking about the soul. I'm not going to attempt to talk about the origin of the soul because I consider that a technical conversation. But what I'm going to do is I'm just going to give an analogy of what I believe the soul is, and we'll take the conversation from there. Let me start with this. I don't want to complicate this. So, so you have a spirit, you have a soul, and you have a body. And of course, your body is the one that relates with the material universe, everything that you can see. Your spirit is the unseen aspect of you. You don't see that aspect of you, but it exists. Now, the soul is neither the spirit nor the body, but the soul sits in between the two. And I like to look at the soul as an embassy, for example. Oh no, let's say an airport, for example. One of the things that an airport signifies, whenever you go into a nation and you have an airport or a seaport, for example, maybe if there's anything as a land port or whatever that is, what that signifies is that that nation is open to trade. That means that there is commerce, there is trading going back and forth. That also implies that some things come into the country and then some things also leave the country. I won't have time to begin to articulate the nature of the things that come and go as it relates to the soul, but I want you to have the idea in your mind that the soul is like the airport where things come and things go. So things can come in and things can go out. And those things that come in have the capacity to transform the location where the airport is. And so let's say, for example, let's say you live in Nigeria, for example, whatever comes into the Nigerian airport has the capacity to alter the environment depending on what you're looking at, and also whatever goes out of that country. So think about your soul as that airport, and it is the central or administrative point of your life where things come and things go. So it's very important to have a clear understanding of the soul. We may not go into the origins of the soul because there are so many schools of thoughts that have different origin stories, but we will not get into the origin story. We believe that we have a soul. And in this conversation, I'm going to be using soul and mind interchangeably, but I want to clarify that the mind is not the soul. However, the mind is the function of the soul. When we talk about mind, we talk about intellect, for example. The soul has intellectual functions, the soul has emotional functions, and the soul has decisive functions. That's the way I see it. So, but I'm going to be using mind and soul interchangeably in this particular conversation. Not that mind is soul, objectively speaking, but just for the sake of this conversation. But I want you to understand that your soul has functions. So let's flow in this conversation. The soul, before I say that, there in systems thinking, there's something known as emergent properties. Emergent properties simply means that when two parts come together, they produce a property that you cannot find in the individual parts. For example, when hydrogen and oxygen comes together in the right proportion, they form water, right? And that water has a property called wetness. So water is wet, for example. But if you look at hydrogen individually, hydrogen doesn't have wetness, as it were. If you look at oxygen, oxygen doesn't have wetness the way water does. But when they come together in that chemical equation and water is born, water water has wetness as an emergent property that cannot be found in the individual properties. Do you understand? Your soul is like that. Think about it as an emergent property. It's not a property in itself, but it's an emergent entity that has its own properties that you may not necessarily find in the spirit or may not necessarily find in the body. But when those two come together, you see the property. And so I want to talk about the properties of the soul as we start this conversation. I don't want to go into technical definitions, but you essentially understand what I explained by the water analogy, right? Wetness is an emergent property of that chemical equation, right? The same way your soul has certain properties that are peculiar to the soul. So your soul is that entity that has certain properties. So let's start from there. So let's not get into the technicalities of that. So let's talk about the properties of the soul. And as I talk about the properties of the soul and with the way the soul behaves, you will begin to see how that applies to finding what is holding you back. Because I'm going to be taking detours or a segue to talk about how to find what holds you back from my definitions or my conversation about the human soul, because the human soul is central to all of our experiences on this earth. Right, so let's talk about the first one, which is consciousness. I'm not going to get into the philosophical conversation of consciousness. It's a very deep conversation. But what that essentially means is that one of the properties of the soul is that the soul has the capacity to know, the capacity for knowledge. And what that means is that the soul has the capacity to know that it exists. That means that you know that you exist. That is a property of the soul, and that is called self awareness or consciousness. That is a property of the soul. So the soul has the capacity to know. Beyond that, it has the capacity to know that it exists, and it also has the capacity to know that other things exist. It has the capacity to know and to be known. Let's keep it there. So have that in mind. Consciousness is a property of the soul, consciousness or self awareness. And the second one is that the soul has what we call agency. We call it will or agency. That means that you can just wake up in the morning and decide to go for a walk. It is an emergent property of the soul, or it is a property of the soul. You can wake up and decide, I'm going to wear a black shirt today. And in the sport, you can change your mind and say, you know what? No, I'm going to wear a red shirt. I'm going to wear a black shoe. No, I'm going to wear a suit. You can do that. And that is the property of the soul. That is how the soul is. These are the properties of the soul. So the soul can act with agency, it can act with intention, right? So that's the second one. It has agency. And the third one is, this is interesting because I'm sure most of you I've heard those conversations about the fact that the cells in the human body replace themselves every couple of years. So that means that the very cells you had when you were born is not the same cells you have now. So in spite of those transformations that happen on a cellular level, you still maintain the same identity. The same consciousness persists across time. So that is the concept of you that doesn't change as the cells in your body transform. So the soul has that property of the continuity of identity over time. That means you can maintain identity across time. That's one of the properties that the soul has. It has that ongoing pattern of knowing itself, of having the same identity across time, regardless of what is happening in the body. Right. So that persistent identity is also the property of the soul. And that property does not belong to your cells or the atoms in your body. It belongs to that entity we call the soul. These things will be important as we get deeper into this conversation. And I want to try and keep this conversation as brief as possible. I don't want to say a lot, just so that we can have this conversation in a way that brings understanding. And I wanted to have all that conversation today, but I'm going to break it down, like I said, into different sessions so that we can grow in this knowledge at the right pace. All right, the other property of the soul is relationality. That means that the soul has the capacity to know and be known, like I initially said. That means that it has that relational ability. The soul wants to be known as much as it knows itself, as much as it can know others. It wants to be known by others as well. Essentially, the soul wants to be in relationship with other people, other souls, right? When I say soul, it sounds esoteric, but let me just say, you as a person, you have that property of relationality. That means you want to relate with other people. It's just a property of the soul. It's not something that we can break down into a fundamental element. That is just what emerges as a result of the emergence of the soul. We just see that as a property, just like wetness is a property of water, right? That's just what it is. So we have that relationality. In another way, we can say love. The soul has the capacity for love, because we can define love in this context as to know and to be known. Let's keep it there. Yeah. All right. And so also another property of the soul is that the soul can suffer disintegration. When the soul is not connected to its source or is not aligned to its identity, it can disintegrate. Not in the way we understand disintegration. For example, if um you let's say, for example, you bury a body and the body disintegrates into the soil, the element, the soul can disintegrate. Not necessarily like that, but it begins to lose its center of gravity, and it begins to fracture. That's the word. So the soul is also vulnerable to disintegration. That is another property of the soul. So I just wanted to just get past these properties, right, so that we can get into the behavior of the soul, because this is where I want to focus my conversation on: the behavior of the soul as it interacts with people and as it interacts with life, right? Good. All right. So bear in mind the properties that I mentioned. Number one, consciousness, which is self awareness, agency, that means you have the capacity to choose and to act on your own, identity over time, relationality, and then vulnerability to disintegration, right? So bear those properties in mind, because those properties show up in the way the soul behaves in relation to other people and relation to circumstances. So number one, let's start with this first one. And as I explain these things, I will try to talk a little bit about how it relates to finding what holds you back. So the very first one is, because the soul has the capacity to know that they exist, that's consciousness. One of the things that the soul wants, or one of the things that the soul seeks, or one of the ways that the soul behaves is that the soul seeks recognition. The soul seeks recognition. Okay, so for example, you can go to a bus station, for example, or you go to a train station, or you go to a social gathering where there are a lot of people, and it's possible that maybe you, as you're walking into the bus station or the train station or maybe the event center, your body brushes against somebody else, right? So your body does that contact, and your body might feel something or not, but you would know that you touched somebody, right? But the moment your body touches that person, it does not mean that your soul has touched that person. The fact that we can make contact with people with our physical body is also a sign that the soul wants to make contact with other people. And one of the ways it wants to make contact is through recognition. So it doesn't just want physical contact or contact, it wants recognition. Right. So whenever we come into different social experiences, for example, we want to be recognized, and that is one of the things that drives people, and that is because the soul has that property of consciousness. You know that you exist, you know that other people exist, and that capacity for consciousness makes you seek recognition. And that is why things like isolation can be very corrosive to the human condition, because the soul was created, the soul has consciousness, and the soul has the property of relationality, right? So one of the things that we seek in our experience as human beings is we want to be recognized. And this is something that everybody knows. There was a teaching I did in 2024, I think July or June 2024. I was talking about the 7 stages of life. And the very first stage I talked about was the legitimacy of existence. That means that one of the fundamental things that every human being wants to know is that my existence is legitimate. And that is why there is a lot of trauma attached to people who were or who have been abandoned or denied by their biological parents or their caregivers. That thing does something inexplicable to the soul, because the soul seeks recognition. And once you do not recognize somebody as legitimate, or you do not recognize the existence of somebody as legitimate, it does something to their soul that cannot be explained in words. And that is because the soul has that property of consciousness and relationality. And because of that, we want to be recognized. And because of that legitimacy of existence, or that desire to be recognized, that can play out in so many ways as you go about life, whether you are building a relationship, a career, or a business, whatever it is that you are building. That property of the soul comes into play every single time in your relationships, in your interactions. So whenever you are in relationships, for example, and let's say, for example, the person you're in a relationship with does not recognize you as legitimate in the relationship or even in life, maybe, and that happens, or that plays out in the way they relate to you, the way they talk to you, it it can set you back as a person. Or let's say, for example, you're trying to start a business, or you're trying to go into a career, and maybe your caregivers or somebody you trust so much, or somebody you look up to so much, somebody you consider a source, or in a certain context, do not approve of that goal, or does not approve of you, or does not approve of your idea, we have the tendency to shrink back or to stop ourselves from action, just because that person that we are seeking recognition from does not give us that recognition. Don't worry, we're getting to where we would tie it up all together. But I want you to see that some of the things that hold us back can be traced to the way the soul is and the way the soul behaves. So when we understand the way the soul behaves, when we understand the way the soul shows up in the world, we can understand how things begin to hold us back, how our soul begins to process the events that now create limitations, in our own experience. And so, because we seek recognition, fundamentally, this is not something that you can take away from the soul. This is not something that you can take away from people. Because we seek recognition, whenever we don't get recognition, whether in an enterprise, in a career, in a relationship, that has the capacity to become limitations of our movement. It can set us up for failure because we are waiting for permission to leave. We are waiting for permission to start. We are waiting for that recognition. We're waiting for that validation because that is the property of the soul. And that is not to say that that is wrong, but you just need to understand that when that happens, it is not necessarily because maybe you're a people pleaser or that you are lazy or you can't take action, but it's because of the nature of the soul, which it's okay to appreciate the nature of that soul. But the moment you begin to realize that because my soul is like this, it has the capacity to sabotage me in whatever enterprise I want to get into. Right. So having this knowledge will help you understand the things that hold you back, whether in relationships or in a career. And how that sometimes, let's say you want to start a business or there's this particular idea that has been bugging you for many years, but you want somebody to validate that particular idea because your soul really wants recognition. Your soul really wants to be recognized. You want to be told that your existence is legitimate and that your ideas are legitimate because of the nature of your soul. And let me tell you the way. Now, I want to take it away from the soul to the brain because let me put it like this: your brain is the physical component of the processes of your soul. And so the way the human brain is designed, the human brain is designed to optimize your survival. That means that it does things in a way to make sure that you stay alive, even if it means sabotaging your own goals or your own purpose or your own vision or the things that you've set out to do. Your brain will make sure that it optimizes for its survival, whether it does not, whether it favors you, whether it favors your goals or not. And when you understand that, you would know how to navigate those properties or those tendencies of the soul to now have the best outcome, right? So seeking recognition, we do not just seek physical contact. The soul seeks recognition. We want to be affirmed as legitimate. We want people to agree that being in this world is our right. And that is why when people, for example, go to other countries, for example, and they are treated as second hand, for example, or they are treated a certain way, it affects them at the core because you are essentially violating a property of the soul, which is the desire for legitimacy of existence, which is desire for recognition. So when this doesn't happen, we have the tendency to hold back from the things that we're supposed to do to make our lives better, right? So the one of the behaviors of the soul is we seek recognition, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with it. And that is why, for example, when you cancel people or when people are cancelled or when people are ostracized from the society or from a community, it deals a dangerous blow or damage to their souls because this is the property of the soul: recognition, legitimacy of existence. We want to know that we are legitimate. Yeah. So that's number one behavior. And I'm going to just take my time with this because I want us to understand this because it will form the substructure of other conversations that we're going to be having in these clarity sessions. And I know that as I teach you these things, something will be happening to your mind. You begin to on Your mind will open up and you begin to see, okay, this is why I didn't do what I was supposed to do. Okay, this is why I was so stuck in this particular stage of my life. You begin to have that epiphany as we have this conversation. That is usually what happens in our clarity sessions. Your eye will just begin to open. Even in things that we are not addressing directly, you begin to get clarity in those particular areas. Right? So the soul seeks recognition. We want to be affirmed that our existence is legitimate and that we have the right to live, to love, to play, to work, and to exchange however we want to exchange. That's the first one. Now, the second one, this is one of the most interesting behaviors of the soul that intrigues me. And that says a lot about, and that explains why a lot of things happen to us the way it does. Now, the second behavior of the soul, in terms of how it interacts with people and life, is that the soul responds to meaning. The soul is a meaning machine or meaning generating machine. That means that the soul always wants to find a meaning in everything, even in things where there is no meaning. And that is because that is the nature of the soul. That is the nature of the soul. For example, when the sun is out, for example, and the sun is very hot, let me say you're in very dry or hot season, your body responds to that heat. Your body also responds to cold. It's not something you can force. It's not something you can turn on and say, okay, now my body responds to heat or my body responds to cold. No, it comes with the package. There's a particular temperature it will get to. Let me say, a particular hot temperature it will get to, your body will respond without you willing it, without you deciding it. It just responds. If it goes below a particular level, your body will respond. So, in the same way, your body responds to heat, your body responds to sound, your body responds to injury. When something happens to you, you respond. There is that reflex movement. In the same way, the soul responds to meaning. Hmm. That means that as long as meaning has not been found in that particular enterprise, whether it's a movie, whether it's a relationship, whether it's a job, whether it's a business, whether it's a conversation, as long as the soul does not make out the meaning from that particular thing that serves its purposes, the soul will not respond. There's a lot I'm saying here, and I may not have the time to unpack it, but I would stay here a little bit just so that I can give us more context so that it will be richer before we move forward. So think about it like this, that the soul behaves as an interpreter. The soul is always searching for meaning. That means that in every encounter that we have, in every experience that we have, we are trying to interpret the event to make sense to us. Now, we're not trying to interpret that event to make sense objectively. We're trying to interpret that event to make sense to us subjectively. Because when we find that meaning, that subjective meaning, that is the only time the soul responds. And this same principle applies in marketing, targeted marketing, for example, where your buying behavior, for example, is studied, and ads are tailored to your buying behavior just to sell a product to you, for example. It is because the soul seeks for meaning in every situation. And even if you present the soul, even if you present yourself with fact, for example, you are looking into that fact to see what makes sense to you. Let me explain it like this. Have you ever seen a situation, or have you ever been in a situation where you, for example, you went to a burial, for example, you went to a burial of somebody who lost a loved one. And of course, we know that there are certain experiences that affect the soul. And I want to show you how that happens underneath, because when these things happen, you're not necessarily aware that is what is happening, but that's what's going on underneath all of that. So you go for a burial. You're not the one that lost a loved one. Maybe somebody very close to you lost a loved one, and you see them crying, for example. Maybe they're about to bury that person, and then you see them wailing and crying, and it triggers something in you. And then maybe you start to cry, or maybe you start to sob, or tears begin to well up in your eye. What happened there? We might say, okay, it's because of the universal reality of the loss of a loved one. But let me show you part of how the soul processes information like that. So you go to this burial and you see that person crying, for example. Now they lost someone. You're not the one that lost someone. But as you see them crying, you begin to feel, almost feel that the pain they are feeling. What is happening there is that your soul, unknown to you, looks at that situation and begins to ask a question. What does this mean to me? So this person is now, this is happening underneath you. It's not happening in your conscious mind, it's happening in your unconscious mind. The soul is asking, what does this person crying to a dead body mean to me? I don't know that dead body, right? I know them, but I don't know that dead body. Why are they crying? And then as your soul begins to process that, then your soul now says, okay, this person is maybe their grandma or their late father or their late mother or their sibling that died. And so the moment your soul establishes that relationship, and this happens in split seconds, in nanoseconds, not even it's not even a conscious process. The moment your soul establishes that connection, this person is crying because this person was their father or their mother or their grandfather, and they had a special relationship. In that moment, your soul now takes that information and now translates it into a question to you. And that question is, who in my life do I have this kind of close relationship with? Oh, my father. My father is still alive. My mother is still alive. I have siblings and they're still alive. And then your soul now gets into scenario planning. So, what if I lose my dad or my mom or my sibling? How will I feel? So, it now takes that particular information and makes it subjective to you. And then you now begin to paint that scenario in your head. Is as though you now begin to hypothetically mourn the loss of your own loved ones. And then the moment that now means something to you, it triggers a reaction in your soul. So your soul only moves when that fact or that reality means something to it. That's the way the soul behaves. That's the way the soul behaves. And that is why, for example, you can be watching a movie, you know that this was scripted. You know that they were doing action cut, you know that. But your soul doesn't process it like that, especially the unconscious part of it. It doesn't process it like that. It takes that thing happening in that movie, maybe that actor died, for example, and then it processes it and asks, what does this mean to me? And then you now begin to imagine, for example, in situations where you were that actor or where you had to fight for those that didn't believe in you, or you had to die for those that rejected you. It translates that movie into a personal experience you've had, and your soul begins to move unawares to your conscious mind. So the only thing that moves the soul is meaning, and it's subjective meaning. As long as your soul can translate that fact or that experience into a subjective experience, then the soul moves. And that is because the soul responds to meaning. It doesn't just respond to stimulus. Meaning is the stimulus of the soul. So one of the easiest ways to get your soul to move or to react is if you can take that particular thing and translate it into a meaning for yourself. For example, if somebody walks up to you on the road and tells you you're an idiot, your soul responds because that statement has a meaning to you. But if to your soul that doesn't mean anything to you, for example, you cannot see how that statement relates to you, your soul will not respond. You only respond when that particular event has a subjective meaning to you. Yes, that is how the soul responds. The soul responds just as a body responds to heat, sound, and injury. The soul responds to meaning, and it takes that meaning and makes it personal. And that is why we have the tendency of taking things personal. It is because of the nature of the soul. Now, when you understand this principle, you will select the things you make personal, because you will realize that the number of things you've made personal in your life constitute the things that have held you back. Let's say, for example, you shared your idea with somebody and they laughed at it. Now, your soul asks, what does this laughter mean to me? Now, it processes that and tells you that this laughter means that my idea is stupid, meaning that I am stupid as a person. That's what the soul does. And as long as your soul interprets it that way, you will have a response. But if your soul doesn't interpret it like that, you won't care about what the person said. And now there are other dimensions of this, because your relationship with the person as well, or how you perceive the person, can also contribute to the way your soul processes that particular thing into meaning. But understand it essentially that the soul responds to meaning. And I want to emphasize here that this is one of the things that has the capacity to create roadblocks for us, because we take we we search for meaning in places where there is no meaning. Remember, your soul makes the meaning out of situations. The situation itself may not have the meaning objectively, but every situation, in fact, everybody has private interpretations of events, private interpretations of interactions. The way you would interpret a particular interaction is not the same way another person will interpret it. That's because our meaning are usually subjective. And that is why you will find somebody who is passionate about, for example, homeless people, and you find somebody who is not passionate about it. It doesn't mean the person who is not passionate is a bad person. No, there's something else that their soul finds meaning in. Do you understand this? So the things that you respond to, the things that your soul responds to, point to how your soul processes information. And it can give you information about the things that hold you back, or the reason why you are stuck in that particular situation. It is possible that you are stuck in that conflict, for example, because of the way your soul is processing that meaning. And always remember, the meaning that the soul obtains is always subjective. It is by itself, it is rarely objective. It takes the contribution of other people's perspective for us to get the 360 view of an event for it to have objectivity. Understand this? And that is why in the multitude of counselors, there is safety, because your perspective is not 360. It is not. There is blindness in the way you process a particular situation, because there are dimensions or angles that you have not yet seen. Right? So take note of that about the soul. The soul responds to meaning. And this could be the reason why you've been stuck for a long time, because you have mastered a particular way of interpreting events that it always works against you. And that is why other perspectives are more hmm, perspectives are more helpful than your own personal perception. And I'm not saying that your perception is not part of the pie. No, it is just a bit of it. Other people's perspective as well, right, would help you see the bigger picture. If, for example, we had a creature on earth that has eyes all over their body, for example, we can trust their account of the story more than someone who has just two eyes in front of them. Do you understand? Somebody who has eyes all over their body sees clearer than somebody who has two eyes. And that is why God's perspective is usually the objective one, because he has more eyes than we do, if you think about it logically, right? Our perspectives are never complete. But the perspective of the one who not only has eyes all around him, but has eyes in all dimensions, in all perspective, in all angles, that one has the most objective view of a situation. I will leave that with you. I don't want to enter a rabbit hole with that conversation. Mm. That is why certain imagery you see in the Bible, for example, are representation of certain abstract realities. The fact that you see, for example, creatures in the Bible that has eyes all over them tells you something about perspective and meaning. That means that God is in a better position to tell you the true purpose of a thing. All right, let me leave it there. All right, so this is another interesting behavior of the soul. and also explains why we may be stuck in certain situations. One of the other ways that the soul behaves is, think about something that is continuous, for example. It's continuous. Or it's not just continuous, but it compounds as it continues. Sorry. Think about something that is continuous, and it's not only continuous but compounds as it's continuous. It reminds me of what is called the reinforcing loop in systems thinking. Think about a snowball coming down from a mountain, and the slope is smooth. As it rolls down the mountain, the snow becomes bigger, right? So it continues and it compounds as it continues, such that at every given point, if you pause that rolling picture, right, and take stock of that rolling picture, at every given point, that snowball is a product of all of its experiences combined, the compounded version of its experiences. So this is the way your soul experiences relationships. It experiences it in continuous compounding fashion. What that means is, for example, if you have been in 10 relationships in your lifetime, at relationship 5, all the experiences from 1, 2, 3, 4 made you who you were in relationship 5. And in relationship 10, all that you experienced, betrayal, love, conflict, unresolved trauma, and all of that compounds into relationship 10. That is to say that at every given point, you are a compound interest, or you are the compounded form of all of your experiences, both the things you resolved and the things you did not resolve. In every relationship, you are never without influences from previous relationships, whether positive or negative. And so the soul carries continuity, compounded continuity into relationships. Hmm. I want you to process this for a while, because the reason why some people are stuck in their relationship, or the reason why they are held back, for example, from entering into relationship or even experiencing love and joy in their relationship, is as a result of all the experiences compounded in a continuous form up onto where they are, including the ones they resolved, the ones they did not resolve. You are never without a compounded influence in your life at every given point in your life. So your soul does not reset after each encounter. Let's say you encounter relationship 1, before you enter relationship 2, you reset. Your soul doesn't work like that. It takes everything with it, resolved and unresolved. That is why most times your leaders, for example, whether it's your pastor or your coach or your therapist, will always tell you, if you come out of a terrible relationship, before you enter the next one, you need to resolve whatever it is that went wrong in that. Take the lessons, not from a victim perspective, but from a taking responsibility perspective before you go into the next one. Because as you go into the next one, you are taking the lessons, the mistakes, the mindset, the models, and the betrayals, the hurt, you are taking it into the next one. And whatever you experience in that next one is the dynamic in that next one is as a result of all the continuous compounded influences of you and that person. So if I was going to do, if I was going to draw a casual loop diagram for you, for example, to show you how many factors have influenced us in a relationship, and then considering all the other factors that influences the other person in a relationship, when we come together, the multiple, multi-layered, multi-dimensional influences that we experience in a single relationship, it's profound. And that is why you must not take things for granted. You must not take your experiences for granted. You must seek to understand your experiences, resolve them, learn from them before you move on. Because if you don't, you are the continuous compounded form of all of your experiences. Right, so your soul carries continuity across relationships. If there was betrayal in the first relationship that you did not resolve, that betrayal will compound as you go into relationships, and it will affect the way you behave. So it's possible that the reason why you are stuck in relationships or in that level where you can't find yourself getting into relationship is because there are things that you've not resolved. And that is because your soul does not reset after each encounter. It carries everything with it into other relationships. So when you now sit, when you with this understanding, when you now sit down and realize, hold on, I am a product of influences. Everything, whatever I am in my life today, is as a result of everything that I've experienced. Then you'll be in a better position to be more objective than the baseline. You'll be more objective and you ask yourself, okay, who am I now compared to who I was before? What changed? What led to those changes? What happened that led me to this point? The things I believe now, what really happened? And then you begin to take stock. Sometimes we may not be able to do it ourselves because oof, this is this is another thing I want to talk about, but let me say it a little bit here. The way the soul tells stories is not linear. The soul doesn't tell stories in a linear fashion. The soul, or rather, the way your memory is recorded in your mind is not the way the event happened. Your memory is recorded in a story format, and that story is recorded in such a way that helps your soul stay sane and survive. And that is why sometimes when certain events happen, you retell that story just so that you can maintain your sanity. I will leave that with you. So your soul carries continuity across relationships. And as I'm saying this, I have that feeling in my heart that somebody is realizing or seeing the reason why they are stuck the way they are stuck. They are stuck in their mind. They are stuck with the mindset. They don't believe in love, for example. They don't believe in relationship. It's as a result of this continuous compounding effect that the soul um, exhibits in relationships. So you accumulate wounds and it surfaces in other relationships uninvited. That is the way the soul behaves. So the soul default setting, the soul does not behave present, it behaves historically. Okay. Let me give you an example. Let me use a typical example that we can find in the world out there. Now we know that um, people might grow up in families where they have different experiences, and those experiences will become traumatic for them. So let's take a sample. So let's say this guy and this lady get married, right? So let's look a little bit into their background. So let's say the guy grew up in a family where the mother was mean to the father, and he saw that, and it created a pain in his heart because he saw his father being treated a certain way by his mom. And so he made a decision, and that decision was a symptom of the pain, or the decision stemmed out of the pain, right? Or a symptom of the pain. You can say that as well. And so the guy decided, I will, I will never let any lady treat me like this in my life. The moment I sense it coming from afar, I will stop it in its tracks. He made that decision before he met her. The lady on her own part, maybe this is just a hypothetical situation, just to buttress the point. The lady, in her own experience, saw the dad be mean to the mom, treat the mom badly. So she made a decision. I will never let a man treat me like this. If I ever sense it from afar, I will stop it in its tracks. And both of them decide what they are going to do to stop it in its tracks. And part of it involves ego and pride and maybe stubbornness. I no go agree. I won't agree. I must fight for my right. So this happened unbeknownst to both of them. If you look at it that way. And then they come into a relationship and they were nice to each other and things like that. And then they enter into the marriage, and the marriage unveils the soul because commitments unveil your soul. Committed relationships provide the safe space, or at least the perceived safe space for all that you are to come out. Because if if you enter into an environment that is peaceful, you have the tendency to relax and to unveil yourself. And so they enter into that relationship, they think to themselves that they are nice to each other while having that decision at the base of their mind. And then one day they have an argument. And then, sorry, give me a moment. Mm, thank you. So they have an argument, and that argument trigger their memories. And it triggers that story in their minds of how my dad was treated badly, my mom was treated badly. And so in that moment, the guy remembers that decision, and then he decides to fight for himself. Now, guess what? It is not the guy's direct pain that is stepping up to fight. It is his dad's pain transferred to him that steps out. So, in that situation, the guy and the lady are face to face, hashing it out, and the dad arises in him in form of his pain. And then the lady is triggered, and her mother arises in her through her pain. So to them, they are having conflict, but in reality, his dad and her mom are fighting. And why are they fighting? They are trying to heal that pain, because the reason why pain shows up is because the pain needs a balm to heal it. Anytime pain shows up, it simply tells you this is an opportunity to be healed. So that pain shows up in both of them, and what both of them expect now, because when you're making that decision, you are not going to say what you are going to do to resolve it. You are going to you would say what you would do to defend yourself. So their pain show up in form of their parents. So while they are having that conversation, their parents are present fighting each other, because the dad is fighting to defend himself, the mother is fighting to defend herself, because they want this pain healed. And so they are going back and forth. And because they had decided, I'm not going to agree, I'm not going to be the one to back down, there is this heated stalemate between them. And every time they have that conflict, the dad rises, the mom rises, and they begin to fight each other. And these two people love each other, but their parents are fighting their pain. If they don't understand how the soul behaves, if they don't have clarity like this, they won't realize that both of them are fighting to be healed. So imagine another situation where it was not the case for the guy, for example, but it was the case for the lady, and the mother rises to fight, but there is no father rising here to fight, for example. And maybe the guy has a way of dealing with such situation, and he decides to calm it down. No, calm down, and then explains and shows kindness and love. What happens is he now administers healing to that age-old pain, and that pain is healed in the lady, but is not healed in the mother, not necessarily, because that pain that was passed down from mother to daughter, for example, resides in the daughter. So when the man does something to heal that pain is resolved in the daughter. And then when they have children, for example, they may not necessarily pass it down. Do you see? So if you don't understand that the soul carries continuity, compounded continuity in relationships, you won't understand the source of some of your conflicts. Hmm. This could be the reason why you are stuck, because you know the pain you've experienced in life, and you know that you will never tolerate the thing that created that pain, and you've set up yourself to defend yourself. And so in every conflict situation, you are making a bid for healing, but maybe the other person is also making a bid for healing. And then both parties are making bids for healing, but nobody is taking the initiative to say, you know what, I'm going to change the way I respond, which is, oh, I don't have time. Mm, which is, yeah, okay, I think is the next one I'm about to talk about. One of the behaviors of the soul, right? So this is what happens because the soul carries continuity across relationship. we can experience this stalemate moment, not just in relationship, but even in your career, for example. Your boss might be treating you a certain way and it triggers an age-old pain from a 10-year ago relationship that sabotages that job that you have, and maybe you lose that job or sabotages your promotion. So if you're not careful, your soul, in order to help you survive, will sabotage your progress only because you don't understand the nature of the soul and you don't understand the way the soul functions. And that is the purpose of these clarity sessions. Um, the we have two more sections in this conversation, but I won't be able to take it today. We'll do it next week and the upper week. But with this conversation, when I get feedback, then we'll know how to take the conversation, because I know most of you will have a lot of questions. And so if you have questions and if you're brave enough to put it on the chat box, I will collate them and then do a Q&A tomorrow. But if you're not able to, I think you can ask questions anonymously as well. Right. So maybe what I'm going to do is next time I'm going to provide an anonymous form for those who want to be anonymous to ask questions. But you can also join our communities. I'm going to put all the link in the YouTube channel. So when you look at the profile, you'll be able to join our WhatsApp channel, follow us on Instagram for updates for conversations like this. Right. So the next thing about the soul, because I want to round up in the next few minutes, is the soul responds to meaning, like I said, but also the soul has the capacity to initiate something new, right? That's also the way the soul behaves. That's why, for example, you might be having a conversation with somebody about food and they say something about football. Do you understand? It's because the soul has the capacity to bring up something new that is not necessarily contextual to the conversation or to the situation, for example. That's the way it happens. So the soul has the capacity to initiate rather than to respond. That means that the soul can decide. And so if we take it back to the previous thing we talked about, in that situation, for example, if the person also knows that, you know what, my soul has the capacity to initiate stuff, I can decide not to respond to this. And of course, you might be responding to it because it has meaning to you personally. But if you understand this and you decide not to interpret it subjectively, and you decide to use the power of the soul to act, to say, you know what, I'm going to choose a different response, it might change your experience. But if you keep subjecting yourself to that, you might keep sabotaging yourself in the process of your journey, whatever journey it is. Whether you're building a business, whether you're building a relationship, a career, whatever it is that you're doing, you do business with your soul, you do relationships with your soul, you do marriage with your soul, you do your life with your soul. And that is why the state of your soul is very important to everything that has to do with your life. I don't want to get into other technical conversations for the sake of time. Right. So two more things and we'll round up. And so two more things and a final definition and we'll round up. So let me do this quickly. Whatever we don't discuss today, we'll discuss in the next clarity session. So the soul feels pain, but it doesn't feel pain the way the body feels pain. The pain of the body is usually proportional to the injury, right? Or to the experience. But the pain of the soul is not necessarily proportional to the injury. Because the soul is in a compounded form all the time, a spoken word may have more damage to a person, to one person than the other person because of their continuous compounded experience. Do you understand? So the soul suffers disproportionately to the cause of the pain. And that is why, for example, you might call someone stupid, for example, they ignore you, and you call another person stupid and they cry. It doesn't mean that person is weak. It is just pointing to the continuous compounded form that their soul is in that moment, depending on all that they've experienced. Because your soul feels pain in a compounded form, right? Because if someone calls that person stupid and they cry, they didn't cry because of the stupid. They cry because the soul in that moment remembers all the times they've been called names and they felt bad about it, depending on who called them the name. And then it triggers a pain that is multidimensional. And that is why in when people are grieving, for example, you don't decide for people how they grieve because you don't know the compounded continuous form of their soul in that moment, right? So I think this is something important for you to learn about your soul as well. So when you grieve the way you grieve, that's information for you. Don't just say, oh, that's the way I am. Understand that your soul is experiencing that because of something. And if you want to have a healthier soul, if you do not want those things to be the things that hold you back, then you must ask questions. And this is why, for example, I have one-on-one clarity sessions with people, like when they need help to uncover these things, and then we get into the depths of it. It's a more nuanced conversation, and we get into the depths of it and discover why these things, your soul is experiencing this thing the way you are experiencing it. So your soul suffers disproportionately to the source of the pain, right? So because the soul does not suffer based on necessarily the physical magnitude of the event. No, the soul operates on significance. What is the significance and the meaning of this thing to me? So something that might be weightless to you, for example, might be significant to another person because the soul suffers disproportionately because of its unique experiences. So, knowing this, you now realize why you respond to certain things the way you respond to things, and how that response could be what is holding you back in your business, in your relationship, even in your life, even in certain decisions you're about to make. For example, there are certain people who are decisive today, not because they don't have the power to decide, but because their soul has had the experience of bad decisions, so now they hesitate. So if they can uncover that this is a wound seeking to be healed, then they can address it and then find the best frameworks to make better decisions. You understand? And understanding these things, of course, I'm still not perfect in my practice of it, but understanding these things help me understand that human beings do not experience life the same way. We might be seeing the same view, but what we are getting out of that view is not the same. That's why two people can watch the same movie. One person is encouraged, has motivation and boldness from that movie. The other person is crying. Do you understand? Somebody might hear music and they are jumping. The other person is weeping. Why? Because your soul is the continuous compounded form of all of your experiences combined. Knowing this will help you investigate the sources of the things that limit you currently in your life. The final thing before the definition and then we round up is that the soul seeks alignment. This is very important, and that's why, for example, concepts like integrity are very important because the soul was created to know that it exists. Sorry, and the soul was created to know that it has a source. And when it is disconnected from its source, it suffers. So most of the suffering that we have in our soul is as a result of misalignment to our source. And let me also say it like this. For example, if there is something you believe about yourself inside, but it doesn't line up with what you're experiencing outside, your soul suffers. So suffering is the distance between your expectation and your reality. Suffering sits in between that. And that is why, for example, let's say you know that you are worth more than you're being paid in that job. Your soul suffers, even if it's a micro suffering, but your soul is suffering, and that could be sabotaging you. That could be influencing the way you respond to the job. That makes you not get the promotion you need to get, for example, or a better job you need to get in order to now match up with that expectation. So your soul, whenever it's misaligned, suffers. So sometimes that suffering you feel in your soul is simply telling you that you are not aligned to the best version of yourself. Your reality is not lining up with your vision. Your reality is not lining up with your expectation. Right? So this is the way the soul is. And that misalignment produces discomfort, and that discomfort can lead you into certain behaviors that will not help you get out of that discomfort or bridge that gap between your expectation and your reality. Knowing these things, what will it do for you? It will help you sit down And take all these things that you've learned and interact with them. Ask yourself questions. Why am I doing this? Why do I experience life this way? Why do I think this way? Why do I behave this way? Why is it difficult for me to start a business? Why can I? I mean, I know I can start a business, but why is it difficult for me to start a business? What's going on with this? You sit with these things, you ask yourself questions, and the reason why a lot of people don't get a- don't get ahead is because they are not comfortable sitting in the silence of that inconvenience and asking themselves those questions and facing the answers. And I usually tell people, you're not having a conversation with yourself. You are not thinking yet until there's a pen and paper in front of you documenting those thoughts, because thoughts are volatile. And so, if you're asking yourself those questions and you're answering them, you have a better chance of articulating what is going on. And the more you articulate your soul, the healthier it is, and the more you can find the things that hold you back, and then begin to walk around, to begin to work at it to make sure that those things no longer hold you back. So in summary, if we're to define the soul based on everything that we have taught today, I want you to understand that your soul is a narrative builder. Your soul is a story builder that uses storytelling to build stories. That means that all your experiences up to date are expressions, or rather, your yes, your inner experience, or your experience of life, your perception of life is simply the story your soul has told about your events in compounded form. What you believe about yourself, what you believe about others, what you believe about God. Of course, your soul requires data, right? So it gathers data and then it weaves that story in such a way that optimizes your survival. And that is why the greatest limiting beliefs or limitations that we face in our lives are the stories we've told about ourselves, we've told to ourselves about ourselves. Our greatest limitations are the stories we've told others about ourselves. And that is why one of the ways to get unstuck is to begin to retell the story of your life. And you have to do it intentionally, you have to do it deliberately. Because your soul is a story builder that uses storytelling as its method, you must realize that your experiences, your memories, right, are data for your soul to interpret as stories that optimizes its survival. Now, but you must hijack that process and begin to intentionally now tell the story of your life the way you want your life to play out. The next clarity session, we will talk about how the soul transforms, how the soul transforms itself, or the things that happen that begin to now trigger the transformation of the soul. And then in the last clarity session in this series, for now, we'll now talk about how words affect the soul, or how language programs the soul. And so we'll tie everything together. I believe you are made for more. I believe you are made for something bigger than what you realize now. But chances are that you are currently sabotaging yourself because of, number one, ignorance, and because of your unwillingness to sit down and transact with the things that you're already learning, things that you already know. Right. So I want you to think about all that we've discussed today. And like I said, I'm sorry this couldn't be a live session. We didn't meet up with the requirements, and so we couldn't go live today. Even if I would have taken questions on the live, but we'll try and see before the next live, maybe not tomorrow, but the next Saturday live we're going to do. We'll be able to ask questions on live and maybe have that one-to-one conversation. But ask your questions in the chat box. I'm going to collate them and do a Q&A session and answer those questions. Let me know if this helped you. Let me know what stuck out for you, or what you're going to be doing, what you've learned. Let me know in the chat box, and I welcome you to like, subscribe, share with your friends, and we're going to be having amazing sessions. Um, with the Gentle Inspirer clarity sessions to help you find things that hold you back and help you get unstuck in those things. And then other things that we're going to be talking about so that you can have clarity for everyday life. So thank you guys for joining us today. Let me know something that you learned, and I'm looking forward to having more conversations with you. We have our WhatsApp community where we share updates and other things that we'll be sharing. If you want to join, all that will be in in our YouTube page. You find all that information. And you can also follow me at Gentle Inspirer on Instagram, and then at the Clarity Sessions, and all that information will be there for you to join. And I hope this helped you. Let me know, and I will see you on the next Clarity session. Take care, and remember, clarity precedes movement. See you next time.